Section 47 of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune, Section 47. While Dr. Bretton listened and waited an opening in the magic circle, his glance restlessly sweeping the room at intervals, lighted by chance on me, where I sat in a quiet nook, not far from my godmother and Monsieur de Bassompierre, who, as usual, were engaged in what Mr. Home called a two-handed crack, what the Count would have interpreted as a tete-a-tete. Graham smiled recognition, crossed the room, asked me how I was, told me I looked pale. I also had my own smile at my own thought. It was now about 3 months since Dr. John had spoken to me, a lapse of which he was not even conscious. He sat down and became silent. His wish was rather to look than converse. Ginevra and Paulina were now opposite to him. He could gaze his fill. He surveyed both forms, studied both faces. Several new guests, ladies as well as gentlemen, had entered the room since dinner, dropping in for the evening conversation. And amongst the gentlemen, I may incidentally observe, I had already noticed by glimpses a severe, dark, professorial outline hovering aloof in an inner saloon, seen only in vista. Monsieur Manuel knew many of the gentlemen present, but I think was a stranger to most of the ladies, excepting myself. In looking towards the hearth, he could not but see me, and naturally made a movement to approach. Seeing, however, Dr. Bretton also, he changed his mind and held back. If that had been all, there would have been no cause for quarrel, but not satisfied with holding back, he puckered up his eyebrows, protruded his lip, and looked so ugly that I averted my eyes from the displeasing spectacle. Monsieur Joseph Emmanuel had arrived, as well as his austere brother, and at this very moment was relieving Ginevra at the piano. What a master touch succeeded her schoolgirl jingle! In what grand, grateful tones the instrument acknowledged the hand of the true artist! "Lucy," began Dr. Bretton, breaking silence and smiling, as Ginevra glided before him, casting a glance as she passed by. "Miss Fanshawe is certainly a fine girl." Of course I assented. "Is there," he pursued, "another in the room as lovely?" "I think there is not another as handsome." "I agree with you, Lucy. You and I do often agree in opinion, in taste, I think, or at least in judgment." "Do we?" I said, somewhat doubtfully. "I believe if you had been a boy, Lucy, instead of a girl, my mother's godson instead of her goddaughter, we should have been good friends. Our opinions would have melted into each other." He had assumed a bantering air. A light, half caressing, half ironic, shone aslant in his eye. "Ah, Graham, I have given more than one solitary moment to thoughts and calculations of your estimate of Lucy Snowe. Was it always kind or just? Had Lucy been intrinsically the same, but possessing the additional advantages of wealth and station, would your manner to her, your value for her, have been quite what they actually were? And yet by these questions I would not seriously infer blame. No, you might sadden and trouble me sometimes, but then mine was a soon depressed and easily deranged temperament. It fell if a cloud crossed the sun. Perhaps before the eye of severe equity I should stand more at fault than you. Trying, then, to keep down the unreasonable pain which thrilled my heart on thus being made to feel that while Graham could devote to others the most grave and earnest, the manliest interest, he had no more than light raillery for Lucy, the friend of lang syne, I inquired calmly, "On what points are we so closely in accordance?" "We each have an observant faculty. You perhaps don't give me credit for the possession, yet I have it. But you were speaking of tastes. We may see the same objects, yet estimate them differently. Let us bring it to the test. Of course you cannot but render homage to the merits of Miss Fanshawe. Now, what do you think of others in the room? My mother, for instance, all the lions yonder, Monsieur A and Z, or let us say that pale little lady, Mr. Bassompierre. You know what I think of your mother. I have not thought of Monsieur A and Z. And the other? I think she is, as you say, a pale little lady. Pale, certainly, just now, when she is fatigued with over-excitement. You don't remember her as a child? I wonder sometimes whether you do. I had forgotten her, but it is noticeable that circumstances, persons, even words and looks that had slipped your memory may, under certain conditions, certain aspects of your own or another's mind, revive. That is possible enough. Yet, he continued, the revival is imperfect, needs confirmation, partakes so much of the dim character of a dream, or of the airy one of a fancy, that the testimony of a witness becomes necessary for corroboration. Were you not a guest at Bretton 10 years ago, when Mr. Home brought his little girl, whom we then called little Polly, to stay with mamma? I was there the night she came, and also the morning she went away. Rather a peculiar child, was she not? I wonder how I treated her. Was I fond of children in those days? Was there anything gracious or kindly about me, great reckless schoolboy as I was? But you don't recollect me, of course? You have seen your own picture at La Terrasse. It is like you personally. In manner you were almost the same yesterday as today. But Lucy, how is that? Such an oracle really whets my curiosity. What am I today? What was I the yesterday of 10 years back? Gracious to whatever pleased you, unkindly or cruel to nothing. There you are wrong. I think I was almost a brute to you, for instance. A brute? No, Graham, I should never have patiently endured brutality. This, however, I do remember. Quiet Lucy Snowe tasted nothing of my grace, as little of your cruelty. Why, had I been Nero himself, I could not have tormented a being inoffensive as a shadow. I smiled, but I also hushed a groan. Oh, I just wished he would let me alone, cease allusion to me. These epithets, these attributes I put from me, his quiet Lucy Snowe, his inoffensive shadow, I gave him back, not with scorn, but with extreme weariness. Theirs was the coldness and the pressure of lead. Let him whelm me with no such weight. Happily he was soon on another theme. On what terms were little Polly and I? Unless my recollections deceive me, we were not foes. You speak very vaguely. Do you think little Polly's memory not more definite? Oh, we don't talk of little Polly now. Pray say, Mr. Bassompierre. And, of course, such a stately personage remembers nothing of Breton. Look at her large eyes, Lucy. Can they read a word in the page of memory? Are they the same which I used to direct to a hornbook? She does not know that I partly taught her to read. In the Bible on Sunday nights. She has a calm, delicate, rather fine profile now. Once, what a little restless, anxious countenance was hers! What a thing is a child's preference! What a bubble! Would you believe it? That lady was fond of me. I think she was in some measure fond of you, said I, moderately. You don't remember then? I had forgotten, but I remember now. She liked me the best of whatever there was at Breton. You thought so. I quite well recall it. I wish I could tell her all I recall, or rather I wish someone, you for instance, would go behind and whisper it all in her ear, and I could have the delight, here as I sit, of watching her look under the intelligence. Could you manage that, think you, Lucy, and make me ever grateful? Could I manage to make you ever grateful? Said I. No, I could not. and I felt my fingers work and my hands interlock. I felt, too, an inward courage, warm and resistant. In this matter I was not disposed to gratify Dr. John, not at all. With now welcome force, I realized his entire misapprehension of my character and nature. He wanted always to give me a role not mine. Nature and I opposed him. He did not at all guess what I felt. He did not read my eyes or face or gestures, though I doubt not all spoke. Leaning towards me coaxingly, he said softly, "Do content me, Lucy." And I would have contented, or at least I would clearly have enlightened him, and taught him well never again to expect of me the part of officious soubrette in a love drama, when, following his soft eager murmur, meeting almost his pleading mellow, "Do content me, Lucy," a sharp hiss pierced my ear on the other side. "Petit chatte, ducaret coquette," sibilated the sudden boa constrictor. "Vous avez l'air bien triste, soumis, rêveur, mais vous ne l'êtes pas, c'est moi qui vous l'ai dit. Sauvage, la flamme allume, l'éclair aux yeux. Oui, j'ai la flamme allume, et je dois la voir," retorted I, turning in just wrath. But Professor Emanuel had hissed his insult and was gone. The worst of the matter was that Dr. Bretton, whose ears, as I have said, were quick and fine, caught every word of this apostrophe. He put his handkerchief to his face and laughed till he shook. "Well done, Lucy!" cried he. "Capital! Petit chatte, petit coquette! Oh, I must tell my mother. Is it true, Lucy, or half true? I believe it is. You redden to the colour of Miss Fanshawe's gown, and really, by my word, now I examine him, that is the same little man who was so savage with you at the concert, the very same, and in his soul he is frantic at this moment, because he sees me laughing. Oh, I must tease him." And Graham, yielding to his bent for mischief, laughed, jested, and whispered on till I could bear no more, and my eyes filled. Suddenly he was sobered. A vacant space appeared near Miss de Bassompierre. The circle surrounding her seemed about to dissolve. This movement was instantly caught by Graham's eye. Ever vigilant, even while laughing, he rose, took his courage in both hands, crossed the room, and made the advantage his own. Dr. John, throughout his whole life, was a man of luck, a man of success. And why? Because he had the eye to see his opportunity, the heart to prompt to well-timed action, the nerve to consummate a perfect work. And no tyrant passion dragged him back, no enthusiasms, no foibles encumbered his way. How well he looked at this very moment! When Paulina looked up as he reached her side, her glance mingled at once with an encountering glance, animated yet modest. His colour, as he spoke to her, became half a blush, half a glow. He stood in her presence brave and bashful, subdued and unobtrusive, yet decided in his purpose and devoted in his ardour. I gathered all this by one view. I did not prolong my observation. Time failed me, had inclination served. The night wore late. Ginevra and I ought already to have been in the Rue Fossette. I rose and bade good night to my godmother and Monsieur de Bassompierre. I know not whether Professor Emanuel had noticed my reluctant acceptance of Dr. Bretton's badinage, or whether he perceived that I was pained, and that on the whole the evening had not been one flow of exultant enjoyment for the volatile, pleasure-loving Mademoiselle Lucy. But as I was leaving the room, he stepped up and inquired whether I had any one to attend me to the Rue Fossette. The professor now spoke politely, and even deferentially, and he looked apologetic and repentant. But I could not recognize his civility at a word, nor meet his contrition with crude premature oblivion. Never hitherto had I felt seriously disposed to resent his brusqueries, or freeze before his fierceness. What he had said to-night, however, I considered unwarranted. My extreme disapprobation of the proceeding must be marked, however slightly. I merely said, "I am provided with attendance," which was true, as Ginevra and I were to be sent home in the carriage, and I passed him with the sliding obeisance with which he was wont to be saluted in class by pupils crossing his estrade. Having sought my shawl, I returned to the vestibule. Monsieur Emmanuel stood there as if waiting. He observed that the night was fine. "Is it?" I said, with a tone and manner whose consummate cheeriness and frostiness I could not but applaud. It was so seldom I could properly act out my own resolution to be reserved and cool where I had been grieved or hurt, that I felt almost proud of this one successful effort. That "is it" sounded just like the manner of other people. I had heard hundreds of such little minced, docked, dry phrases from the pursed-up coral lips of a score of self-possessed, self-sufficing Misses and Mademoiselles. That Monsieur Paul would not stand any prolonged experience of this sort of dialogue I knew, but he certainly merited a sample of curt and arid. I believe he thought so himself, for he took the dose quietly. He looked at my shawl, and objected to its lightness. I decidedly told him it was as heavy as I wished. Receding aloof, and standing apart, I leaned on the banister of the stairs, folding my shawl about me, and fixed my eyes on a dreary religious painting darkening the wall. Ginevra was long in coming. Tedious seemed her loitering. Monsieur Paul was still there. My ear expected from his lips an angry tone. He came nearer. "Now for another hiss," thought I. Had not the action been too uncivil, I could have stopped my ears with my fingers in terror of the thrill. Nothing happens as we expect. Listen for a coo or a murmur. It is then you will hear a cry of prey or pain. Await a piercing shriek, an angry threat, and welcome an amicable greeting, a low kind whisper. Monsieur Paul spoke gently. "Friends," said he, "do not quarrel for a word. Tell me, was it I, or ce grand fat d'Anglaise," so he profanely denominated Dr. Bretton, "who made your eyes so humid and your cheeks so hot as they are even now?" "I am not conscious of you, monsieur, or of any other having excited such emotion as you indicate," was my answer, and in giving it I again surpassed my usual self and achieved a neat, frosty falsehood. "But what did I say?" he pursued. "Tell me. I was angry. I have forgotten my words. What were they?" "Such as it is best to forget," said I, still quite calm and chill. "Then it was my words which wounded you. Consider them unsaid. Permit my retractation. Accord my pardon." "I am not angry, monsieur." "Then you are worse than angry, grieved. Forgive me, Miss Lucy." "Monsieur Emmanuel, I do forgive you." "Let me hear you say, in the voice natural to you, and not in that alien tone, 'Mon ami, je vous pardonne.'" He made me smile. Who could help smiling at his wistfulness, his simplicity, his earnestness? "Bon!" he cried. "Voilà que le jour va poindre. Dites donc, mon ami, Monsieur Paul, je vous pardonne." "I will have no monsieur. Speak the other word, or I shall not believe you sincere. Another effort. Mon ami, or else in English, my friend." Now, "my friend" had rather another sound and significancy than mon ami. It did not breathe the same sense of domestic and intimate affection. Mon ami I could not say to Monsieur Paul. My friend I could, and did say without difficulty. This distinction existed not for him, however, and he was quite satisfied with the English phrase. He smiled. You should have seen him smile, reader, and you should have marked the difference between his countenance now and that he wore half an hour ago. I cannot affirm that I had ever witnessed the smile of pleasure, or content, or kindness round Monsieur Paul's lips, or in his eyes before. The ironic, the sarcastic, the disdainful, the passionately exultant, I had hundreds of times seen him expressed by what he called a smile, but any illuminated sign of milder or warmer feelings struck me as wholly new in his visage. It changed it as from a mask to a face. The deep lines left his features, the very complexion seemed clearer and fresher. That swart, sallow, southern darkness which spoke his Spanish blood became displaced by a lighter hue. I know not that I have ever seen in any other human face an equal metamorphosis from a similar cause. He now took me to the carriage. At the same moment Monsieur de Bassompierre came out with his niece. In a pretty humour was Mistress Fanshawe. She had found the evening a grand failure. Completely upset as to temper, she gave way to the most uncontrolled moroseness as soon as we were seated, and the carriage door closed. Her invectives against Dr. Bretton had something venomous in them. Having found herself impotent either to charm or sting him, hatred was her only resource, and this hatred she expressed in terms so unmeasured and proportions so monstrous that after listening for a while with assumed stoicism, my outraged sense of justice at last and suddenly caught fire. An explosion ensued, for I could be passionate too, especially with my present fair but faulty associate, who never failed to stir the worst dregs of me. It was well that the carriage wheels made a tremendous rattle over the flinty Choseville pavement, for I can assure the reader there was neither dead silence nor calm discussion within the vehicle. Half in earnest, half in seeming, I made it my business to storm down Ginevra. She had set out rampant from the Rue Crecy. It was necessary to tame her before we reached the Rue Fossette. To this end it was indispensable to show up her sterling value and high deserts, and this must be done in language of which the fidelity and homeliness might challenge comparison with the compliments of a John Knox to a Mary Stuart. This was the right discipline for Ginevra. It suited her. I am quite sure she went to bed that night all the better and more settled in mind and mood, and slept all the more sweetly for having undergone a sound moral drubbing. End of section 47. Recording by Leanne Fortune.